a house out of this area and we go somewhere else. So my mother had stashed money away and stashed money away. By the way, after the bombing, when she was out in the courtyard looking for her cutlery in the rubble, she kept saying, I shall never save again. And she didn't. She didn't. She lived comfortably and on what she had, and she made out just fine. But anyway, she had 20,000 Reichsmark. And she said, what am I going to do with this? I'd like to save it. I'd like to save it. So somebody told her about lumber, that she could buy lumber, boards. And it was a capital idea because with the destruction everywhere, what you needed was building material. Unfortunately, not knowing anything about it, and I don't think my dad was involved, the lumber was stored one on top of the other. And that is, if you know anything about that, it ruins the lumber. You make spaces, air spaces between them. That wasn't the case, so that 20,000 was gone too. Anyway, 1947, the day of the Deutschmark, I was going to school in my ugly yellow boots and I went past a shoe store. And there were shoes in the window. Can you can't imagine what that felt like. There was stuff all of a sudden. We saw pastry in bake shops. We saw bananas. We saw oranges. Stuff you just were non-existent because the store owners hoarded things. Of course they couldn't hoard bananas and oranges, but they just didn't bring them because they didn't want to be bothered with that old currency. They kept everything to themselves, for themselves, until they were able to get hard currency for it. Okay? So, 40 marks. My dad had 40 marks, my mother had 40 marks. I had 40 marks, my sister. And I don't think the shoes were more than 10 marks or something like that, but I pleaded for please, the first thing. And we had no, think about it, we had lost everything. We had no sheets, we had no towels, we had no dishes. We had bare minimum just to live from day to day, and I wanted a pair of shoes when there was so much else to buy. These are the things that were monumental in my life at the time, okay? Now I'm going to look at my cheat sheet again. Okay, up above us, up above the Speerhaus, up over there was a labor camp. Again, camp for the people that built the underground tunnels and the air raid shelters and all of that. They, at one time, some of them were brought over from the occupied countries like Czech Republic or Poland, and they were housed there. It was all very decent. I've been through there. They had a large canteen, and when the war was over and these people were all able to go back to where they had been abducted from, what came in were the refugees. The refugees from the Slowetenland, from areas of Czech Republic that were German, that were not only kicked out by the locals, the Russians were coming in because the Russians took over these countries too. Poland, Czech Republic. They overrolled them just like Hitler had done. These poor people never get out from under, okay? But the Germans that lived there were told, go back to where you belong, go home, okay? So they literally picked up what they could carry. My niece's husband was one of those boys. He was maybe 7 years old, and his family was told, go, leave everything, only what you can carry. Couple of hours, and you leave, you go. On foot, walking. Distances like from here to Connecticut, okay? And his mother, and he told us his mother had a bunt pan under her arm. and a bag. Do you believe that? In her befogged mind, she could think of nothing else but this bond pen that had belonged to her mother, and it was precious, and she was going to take it with her. These tragedies that happen in wars, you see these pictures of Syria. Can you believe this is still going on? I think we had so much war in the last 60 years or such that we would get a little smarter. You don't gain anything, you just lose, and it's always fought on the backs of the civil population, isn't it? Everybody that can't help themselves, it just has to happen to you, and you have to deal with it and see how you get on. But we made it. Anyway, let me see what else I wrote down here. All right. Dad was definitely employed by the American Army, and the place was not up on the tea house. Maybe I have a shot of the tea house. Let's go see if it's somewhere.
Forward?
Forward, yes. That's Hitler in Albert Speer. And this is the bunker that we were. Okay, up there, that's a good shot. See that place up there? That's the tea house. There's a road that leads to about 500 feet from the summit. There's a turnout where a car or a bus can turn around. Then you have a tunnel that goes into the mountain that a car can drive in. Have you been there?
Yes.
Yeah. And there's a rotunda where the car can turn around, and there's the elevator up there. Because of the weather conditions, in the winter it was not open for anybody going up there. But because there was so much stuff up in there that the population could steal, and let me tell you, everything that wasn't nailed down was stolen. The house, the Speer house that we moved into, was bare. There wasn't a stick of furniture in there, except in Mrs. Speer's bedroom there were photographs, personal photographs, this thick. I'm not exaggerating. We were walking on photographs. Can you imagine what they would be worth, what they would have been worth? You know what we did with it? We were scared to death to be found with material like that. We burned it in the furnace. It's criminal, but we were scared. We were just, we lived in fear for at least 4 years before the war was over, because we were told continuously, if you don't fight and we don't win this war, if you don't do your bit to make sure that the Germans are going to win this war, don't think you're going to survive. No way. Okay, they're coming, they're killing you, or some other way, but don't expect to outlive a defeat anyway. We thought whoever could catch us with all this stuff, with Hitler on every third picture, and they think we own this, okay? They didn't know us from Adams. They thought we lived here and this was our stuff, so we burned it, okay? All right, Dad had to be up there in the winter. In the lower area where the elevator is, tell me when I should shut up. It's 8 o'clock already. How long can you stay? Another half hour?
Sure.
Okay, I'll make it short. There
I
was
could stay all night.
oh, too nice. There was a reservoir. There was a submarine diesel as an auxiliary power supply, and the diesel, in order not to break up this mountain, which didn't look extremely stable anyway, they immersed it in a basin of oil, diesel oil. And it absorbed the motion of this thing. Okay, you know what the value was of that oil? Not only that, there were hundreds of yards of copper wiring and anything made out of steel. A farmer would have to have a new implement, couldn't buy it, so he could find a piece of steel somewhere, and he found a blacksmith, they could fashion it. Every goods was marketable. So Dad was up there in the winter, and he had 2 other guys that would relieve him. He'd stay a week, the other guy would up a week, and then the other one. But he would run out of food occasionally, and he had one of those crank phones, one of those field phones, and he, at the base station where this road up there started, a little souvenir shop opened, because it was a roaring good business with the U.S. Army to go up there and see what everything was. And I must admit to you, I had a couple of school friends up there. I'm still in touch with one of them, and we would sit and wait for a victim, okay? And they would come over. We learned English in school. After 10 years, I had my first English lesson, so it was good practice, and I could talk to these guys. And what was this? Well, this was that, and that was the private home of Eva Braun. They believed anything. But in the base station, oh yeah, at one time, it was shameful. We had this little rod, it was this long, it was a rod, and we had found it on the ground because Hitler's house was destroyed. And Eva Braun did live there, and she had a canary. So we said, okay, we said to this one GI, this is a rod out of Eva Braun's canary cage. And he reached in his pocket and he had gum. And he gave us, if you give me the rod, I'll give you all this gum. Oh, we had gum for 5 days. Anyway, but okay, down in that little gift shop was the other half of that telephone. And when Dad ran out of provisions, he'd ring and they'd get in touch with me, and I would put on, I get what he wanted, and I had a backpack. And I would start out on foot, because most of the time the snow was heavier at this elevation, and I carried my skis.
Yeah.
I waltzed up there until I couldn't make it anymore on foot, and I put my skis on and waltzed the rest of the way. And because I was so dog tired by the time I get to the parking lot, I was able to turn on the elevator. I went in there and turned a couple of switches, and this machine started up. I felt fabulous. Anyway, and Dad had to, in the evening, I'd stay overnight because he didn't want me to come down the same day, and he would ride down and shut the engine off and scramble up over the snow back into the house. It was interesting life, let me tell you. And then I'd say, I'm not quite so sure, I think it was in 47, that he went up one day, and it was in the spring. And it was March sun melts anything. And the road was, had melted off, and okay, there were guardrails on the most dangerous curves, and they were stone stanchions with big square bowls of wood connecting these, because the precipice was pretty steep down there. Okay, he had a man with him. He was going to make repairs up there, and they were going up the mountainside, and the rocks had cast a shadow, and that was icy. And didn't he get onto the ice with his motorcycle and started sliding right to the edge? And he said to the guy in back, jump, jump. And with that, he went over the side. And he tumbled and tumbled and tumbled, with the motorcycle hitting him once or twice, okay? And when he finally stopped, he called for his buddy, and he didn't answer, so he crawled back up. He had broken ribs, he had a broken shoulder, broken arm, he had a wound in his head, bleeding profusely. But he went up and he found him, and he had died. He had the motorcycle fall on him. Tragic, tragic. He made it on foot, believe it or not, all the way down, and it's 4,500 feet from here down to the valley. And there was an alpine hut where hikers would go to and could stay overnight, and it was open. There was a cook there, and and a truck had come to deliver coal, and they said, what are you going to do with this man? Oh, he ain't going to make it anyway. So they, believe it or not, they laid him on top of the coal in the bag, okay? Didn't put him in the cab because he was bleeding so much. He was messing up the cab. Anyway, but he made it. He came through. Anyway, that was an interesting experience. Let me see. What else have I done? All right. All right, okay. 1947, I would say, was beginning 1948. There was this massive amount of denazification going around, okay? We have to hunt these people down that are responsible for the misery that we're in, okay? All right, Dad was a Nazi, I tell you that truthfully. He was without work in 1933 for 3 years, had not a nickel to feed his family, was told if he joined the Nazi party he would get a job. He did, and he got a job. He was convinced it was a good system. And he had this sad, sad story every time something happened that was horrendous. Oh, I told you before, we really, really, really didn't know about concentration camps. And I hope to believe that if the German people had known, there would have been a revolt. I hope so. Anyway, but Dad was not inducted in the army because they needed him to ferry Hitler up there. Every time Hitler went in the elevator, Dad had to stand there and turn the wheel and get him up there. He only went 5 times because he was afraid of height. So the whole thing was for nothing. Okay? Yes.